Everybody can hear me okay? I'm going to assume that you can, so great. Okay, great. Welcome everyone. I'm really pleased to be taking part in today's Congress. My name is Andrew Connor. I'm Programme Director for a Master's Programme in Design and Digital Media at the University of Edinburgh. One of the areas which I'm particularly interested in is creating new experiences within virtual reality and how that relates back to the idea of narrative. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And one of the things which I really like about narrative, and particularly reading through a book, is this idea of following along with the characters, but being able to choose a little bit about what I want to do. So you're probably very familiar with this passage. It's from the beginning of The Two Towers, part of The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. And it's the point where Sam and Frodo have crossed the Great River and are on their way to Mordor. And then the three people left behind, Gimli, Aragorn, and Legolas, are working out what to do next. Do they follow Sam and Frodo, or do they follow the two hobbits, Pippin and Merry, who've been captured by the orcs? Tolkien makes the decision for you. You choose to go with Gimli, Aragorn, and Legolas because that's how the story continues. I personally, when I read this, I'm afraid not that interested in Pippin and Merry. They're my least favorite characters. I want to know what's going on with Sam and Frodo. Personally, I flip forward in the book and go to the next part of that passage. When you're talking about something that's a film or an audiovisual experience, you're not really able to do that. The narrative you follow is generally quite linear and you can't make that choice. But one of the interesting things that we can do these days is we do have that choice. And a lot of the entertainment choices we make allow us this freedom of doing things. Now, this may be hopefully a familiar image to many of you. It's a mock-up of the holodeck. I find it quite funny that it's a mock-up of a virtual space. Within a virtual space, this has been created for Second Life, an online virtual meeting area. But the idea of the holodeck is that you can recreate a story and experience and choose how to experience it yourself. So in Star Trek, Picard quite frequently takes on the role of Sherlock Holmes and things like that. But we then get to the idea of how does this actually work within virtual reality? And I tend to think of virtual reality as having a couple of different aspects to it. I find this quite interesting. This is a comment by Gray Hodgkinson in a paper he published in 2016, where he was talking about the difference between experiencing narratives in our modern audiovisual experiences. So on the one hand, you have story giving, and he used this idea of story giving, saying the story is there, you can follow it, but it's the player who chooses how to experience it. So quite frequently, this is how we experience things within role-playing games. You as a player have the agency to choose what you do next. Do I do this quest? Do I do that quest? How do I follow it along within the game? What story do I want to explore? Storytelling, on the other hand, is what we regard as the more natural storytelling novel type of way, the way that Lord of the Rings works. The author has control of the story. Pacing, the next thing that comes up, the next chapter is about this character. The chapter after that is about a different character. They control the aspects of what's presented to the reader, particularly in the first time reading it through. As I said, I know I skip through things, but the first time I read The Lord of the Rings, obviously I was following it word for word. Now, I tend to break this into two different ways of experiencing virtual reality as an audiovisual experience. The first one is interactive, and this is what I would equate to this idea of story giving. It's where there's a very strong participant presence. You have control, agency. You make the choices as a participant about what happens next. And this is typical of a role-playing game. There are issues of that in our current versions of virtual reality because it relies on real-time rendering, which means computationally you have to recreate the scene around the player based on the decisions that they make, what they decide to attack, what they decide to pick up, where they want to go next. It has to be calculated and drawn around them, which means it's at a low visual quality. Passive virtual reality, passive is maybe not the best term for it, but it's where the story is told to you. It's crafted by a director. There are no direct choices for the participant. You experience what you're being asked to experience. So it's a bit like being in the middle of the Lord of the Rings, experiencing what's going on around you, but you've no control over what happens next. You follow along with the action. And many 360-degree films and animations at the moment take this approach. So as an example of a game where it's very interactive, this is a shot from Skyrim, a list of quests. I can choose which quest to follow. I can choose which direction to go, how I follow through the game. There's a main plot, but there are a lot of subplots which I can also explore. This is a screenshot from a VR experience called Cosmic Flow, and this is extremely passive. This doesn't even really have a narrative. This is just a mandala pattern which you relax and enjoy. It constantly changes around you along with the music. So it's very much an experience which is passive. You don't really have any control. However, I find this slightly unsatisfying for the point of view of wanting to make a choice as to how I follow a story. I don't want to necessarily have the full choice over what I do in terms of a game, but equally I want to have some choice about what I next experience. And I was particularly struck by this passage from the book Hamlet on the Holodeck by Murray, where she observed, while watching a 3D immersive film, she said there was a couple in what would normally be the background. They cross the street, but there is no background for her. She's so immersed in the scene, it's as if she's there. But she's really interested in what that couple are about to do. But in the film, she is forced to follow the main character. She wants to follow the other characters instead. So participative VR for me is where you can make that choice. Where do I go next? What do I follow next? You have that element of choice. The narrative itself is being crafted by the director. So you could think of it in terms of cutscene animations. You just choose which part of the story you experience next. But there is a problem when you're talking about it in virtual reality, because it's not like a film or an animation where it's caught within a frame. You can look anywhere as a participant. So what's really important is giving the participant the choice of where to go through capturing their attention. So quite frequently you will make the choice of what you do next by either clicking on something or even by tracking the eye motion of the participant. If they look at something for long enough, then you can say, right, that's what they want to do next. So capturing the attention and working out where they're looking becomes important in terms of having those points of choice within the experience. Now, that's relatively easy to do when you're working in film. You have the frame, you can control what the viewer is looking at. It limits the space, so you can only look at this. You have to see what the director chooses you to look at, and the edit follows similar kind of rules. However, in virtual reality, you don't have that frame. You have to take a look as if you're in real life. Now, in real life, you know where to look. You'll hear a sound, you'll see a motion happening around you, and your eyes drawn to it. And this is very much what current virtual reality directors do. They capture your attention by a loud sound, by a flash of color, by movement. And you follow the story along by following that motion, that attentional capture. And in current VR films, such as Invasion, came out in 2016, this is what's happening. This spacecraft which appears grabs your attention. It's moving in the sky. It's got bright lights coming from it. It has the sound. You follow and you take a look at what's going on, and you follow what the main character, the rabbit, is doing in relation to the spacecraft and the people who come out of it. It's a very single narrative. You don't have any choices. You really just take a look at what's going on and you follow it through. I would liken this experience to the early days of film, where the camera was fixed in place. It was a single shot, and at the end of it, that was it, the film finished. That's where we're at, really, at the moment with VR. But we do want to get to the point where we've got more multiple storylines and choices going on in this participative way. And one of the things that you need to do as well with that is to work out how to continue that engagement. You get their attention towards one thing that's happening, but then how do you continue with that? And part of that is maybe taking a look past camera, past the idea of film and television, which is informing VR and games as well, and maybe going back even to the theatre, the idea of theatre in the round, where different things might be happening on the centre of the stage, and you're directing people's viewpoints. And we might even follow people around. You might have been to an experience where people act in a house, and you follow the action through the rooms with them. And that's something which also you can do within the virtual reality experience. And in fact, Paper Birds does this. This character walks along this rickety bridge, your eye follows him, and he takes you to the next part of the story. So this motion, this attention captures your eyes as you go through. But I also want to have this element of choice. So there's normally a main plot. You can think about it as a main story that's within the film or the experience or the book. But then there might be subplots, and that's where it becomes interesting. How do these subplots support the main story? How do they give you the element of choice? And how do you capture that attention as you go through? So you need to not only capture the attention for the main story, but you need to have relatively unobtrusive but still noticeable elements in the background, such as the couple crossing the street in the film that Mary watched, which will also grab your attention and allow you to follow that story, but still give you the overall sense. You can still return to the main plot and understand how the entire narrative works out. I think that's the challenge for virtual reality at the moment. That's the area where the new sets of directors working in this field need to start thinking about how do we mesh this together into this participative VR where the subplots all support the main plot, but give that element of choice to the participant. Some elements such as Notes and Blindness do this in terms of having multiple stories. You follow one, then the next, then the next, and they're all linked together by the use of a specific style. But it's something where we have much more that we can explore and go with in the future. So I kind of skimmed through quite a lot of things there because I'm aware I'm trying to do this within 15 minutes. But I'll finish up there. There'll be more that goes into the written paper. But if anybody has any questions, I don't know if there's time for that, but I'm very happy to answer any questions that there might be.